Imagine how much better the New York Mets would be right now if instead of trading for Ryan Helsley at the deadline, they had picked up Jhoan Duran.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Enter for a chance to win a dream golf trip for two to any golf tournament in the USA by visiting 5hewin.com for full rules and entry. No purchase necessary. Excludes the Masters tournament. Ends October 31st, 2025. Now, since the Mets had an off day today, I wanted to take a show here and look back at the trade deadline. And obviously, the timing of this could not be better because the deadline clearly so far has been a little bit of a flop for the Mets. And Ryan Helsley is the biggest reason for that. And he's coming off another meltdown of an outing yesterday. For those of you who might have missed it, I did a live show right after the game. So if you want my gut, raw reaction, the raw emotions, and the frustration that I had after that Mets loss, I do encourage you to check out that show on the YouTube channel or the podcast feed. But I want to take the time now to go through what happened then, the Mets thought process at the time, and where we're at, and then try to decide, did the front office make a mistake that, should be criticized? So let's just go back to the deadline. At the time, the Mets were sitting in first place in the NL East. Might be hard to believe now or hard to remember now, but they were right there with the Phillies. They were actually a half game up. They were even in the loss column, and the Mets were 1 game up in the win column. But for all intents and purposes, these two teams through the first 4 months of the season were tied. And they were looking to bolster their roster for the stretch run, and they were both shopping in similar markets. They needed to address the back end of their bullpens, and they both needed a center fielder. So they were calling up similar teams, trying to get similar players, and they ultimately ended up each accomplishing what they wanted to. They each got a center fielder, and they each got a closer type. The Mets actually got 3 relievers compared to the Phillies, who just picked up 1, along with signing David Robertson a little bit before the deadline, who was sort of their other big deadline acquisition. So as we go through it all, July 25th, the Mets make their first trade. They pick up Gregory Soto from the Orioles. Check off the box for a left-handed reliever. Then, the day before the deadline, they make a trade with the Giants to pick up Tyler Rogers, and a few hours later, they swing another deal for Ryan Helsley. The Phillies, they make their big move, which was the biggest blockbuster of the deadline at the time before A.J. Preller would swing a deal for Mason Miller the day later, or on deadline day, a day later, where he got Mason Miller, which was crazy. But Jhoan Duran was supposed to be the best closer dealt at the deadline, and the Phillies got him. He had a 2.01 ERA at the time with 16 saves over 49 and a third innings pitched. But Ryan Helsley was no slouch. He had a 3 ERA in 36 innings pitched with 21 saves. And the difference in trade packages, as we'll get to more in the next segment, was pretty stark because Duran came with 2.5 years of control. The Phillies will have him for 2026 and 2027. The Mets went the rental route. But if you compare those two guys and what they have been throughout their careers, it's not crazy to say that they were on a similar tier. For Helsley, last year he pitched to a 2.04 ERA in 66 and a third innings pitched and saved an MLB best 49 games. Duran last year had a 3.64 ERA with 23 saves. Now, if you look at their career since 2022, because for Helsley, his breakout season came in 2022. He debuted in 2019, but that breakout came when he had his first All-Star appearance and pitched to a 1.25 ERA in 64 and 2/3 innings pitched, and also was 12th in Cy Young voting. Meanwhile, Duran made his debut that season and really hit the ground running. So if you look at the best relievers in baseball from 2022 all the way up to July 31st, 2025, because we certainly can't count the stats after the deadline when you factor in Helsley. But if you look at the numbers, the best reliever in baseball over that span, Emmanuel Clase, a 1.99 ERA. The second best reliever in baseball over that span, Ryan Helsley, a 2.03 ERA in 203 and 2/3 innings pitched for the Cardinals from 2022 through to July 31st, 2025. Duran had a 2.47 ERA during that same time frame across 233 and 2/3 innings pitched. So while Duran came with more control and was having a little bit of a better season, Ryan Helsley was comparable. And the Mets got Tyler Rogers, who had a 1.80 ERA in 50 innings with the Giants, along with Soto. So on paper, the Mets actually addressed their bullpen a little bit more than the Phillies. They brought in more talent because they got 3 arms compared to 1, but you could still say for the Phillies, they got the best of the bunch. The next day, each team got their center fielder. For the Phillies, they pulled off the trade first. They got Harrison Bader, former Met. Meanwhile, the Mets traded for Cedric Mullins. And both teams were probably after Luis Robert as their top target, but Robert was not dealt. At the time, Bader had 12 home runs, 10 stolen bases, a 778 OPS, and was worth 2 wins above replacement according to Fangraphs. Meanwhile, Mullins had 15 home runs, 14 stolen bases, a 738 OPS. So his OPS was 40 points worse, and his WAR was nearly a win worse at 1.1, but he was coming off a big month of July where he had an 868 OPS. And the Mets probably just didn't want to run back the same center field room that they had last year with Tyrone Taylor and Harrison Bader, and they thought, all right, let's get a lefty that complements Tyrone Taylor a little bit better and pull off a trade for Mullins. Since then, though, if you look at the Phillies' 2 trades and you look at what's happened for the Mets, things could not have worked out worse for the Mets, and they could not have worked out better for the Phillies. We'll start in center. Mullins has a 591 OPS in a Mets uniform. It's been worth 0.2 wins above replacement. Harrison Bader has a 872 OPS in a Phillies uniform and has been worth 0.8 wins above replacement. Bader's hitting 313, 385 on base, 488 slug. He's been unbelievable for them. And then we get to the closers. Duran has a 1.69 ERA. He's given up 2 earned runs in 10 and 2/3 innings pitched, 9 for 10 in save opportunities. He has picked up a couple of losses, one of them to the Mets, but overall, he has done exactly what he was supposed to. He has solidified the back end of that Phillies bullpen. Helsley, on the other hand, has a 11.45 ERA. He's given up 14 earned runs at 11 innings pitched. Batters rate in 358 against him. He has 4 blown saves and 3 losses. He has been an unmitigated disaster. It's the only way you can describe it. Tyler Rogers has been good, 2.20 ERA, although I will say batters are hitting 308 against him, and he has only stranded 3 of his 6 inherited runners, so I don't think he's been quite as lights out as that ERA would suggest, but you're still not knocking that trade at this time. He's pitching a ton of innings for the Mets. And same thing with Gregory Soto, a 1.84 ERA. Yes, he gave up a big hit yesterday, although, as I talked about on that post-game stream, it was a good pitch. It was just a better piece of hitting for Riley Green. Soto has stranded 6 of 10 inherited runners. So those 2 have not been bad. But Helsley's been awful, and Duran has been awesome. And you could say that Bader's been awesome, and Mullins has been awful. So if you had just flipped those trades and the Mets had gotten Harrison Bader and Jhoan Duran, I mean, there's no denying it. They'd be a much better team right now. And if things hold from what we've seen so far and the Phillies win this division, you can say that they were able to win the division due to the trades that they made at the deadline and how those trades panned out for them. They've gotten great production. What I want to talk about in the next segment, though, is if the Mets made a mistake, could they have pulled off either of those trades instead of the Phillies, and would they have been better off had they done so, not just for this season, because that's obvious, but long term? Would those have been the right moves for the Mets to make? We're going to go through that here in just a minute. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. This grape, ginger, and lime-flavored shot brings the iconic taste of a golf course favorite to a non-alcoholic boost. It's perfect for sinking birdies or making great memories with friends. It's your hole-in-one for your energy game. Whether you're out on the golf course or just need a little extra push to get you through your day, 5-Hour Energy Transfusion delivers that clubhouse flavor that you love without ever having to leave the green. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors. And the grape, ginger, lime flavor of 5-Hour Energy Transfusion gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without leaving the course or chasing down that beverage cart. Now you can amp up the fun even more because just buy, snap, and enter and you're going to get a chance to win a dream golf trip for two to any golf tournament in the USA. Tee up that trip. Visit 5HEWin. That's the number 5HEWin.com for full rules and entry. No purchase necessary. Excludes the Masters tournament. Ends October 31st, 2025. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. I would love to get there by the end of the season. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. So let's go through the center field part of this first because it's a little bit quicker and easier to digest. For Harrison Bader, the Phillies traded Jeremy Villoria and Hendry Mendez. Villoria is a 17-year-old Dominican Summer League arm. I mean, he's a guy that they signed just this year for $425,000, which is not an insignificant signing bonus, but it's still effectively a lottery ticket when you're talking about a teenager. Right now, he's starting in the DSL. Doesn't mean that he's going to do that stateside, but hey, a live 17-year-old arm. Mendez is a 21-year-old outfielder in AA who had an 808 OPS prior to being dealt. Now, the Mets, to get Mullins, they traded three relief prospects: Anthony Nunez, Ramon Gomez, and Chandler Marsh. At the time, all those guys had great numbers. Don't get me wrong. At the time, I know that the Mets pulled off a trade for Cedric Mullins for a guy in Anthony Nunez who was undrafted, guy in Chandler Marsh who was undrafted, and Ramon Gomez, international free agent, they spent $10,000 on. So when you look at it that way, the Mets traded effectively nothing as far as what it took when it came to investment to get those players. Yes, three good arms, potential relievers, but trading relief prospects is really not significant. What the Phillies gave up for Bader, if you just think about a AA outfielder, probably a little bit more significant, but I don't think that these two trade packages are that much different. I honestly think this just came down to personal preference. And for the Mets, it's even been reported lately that they weren't really that in on Harrison Bader. Now, at the time, if you go back and listen to the old episode of Locked On Mets, I started off wanting a different Duran, not a Duran, a Duran. I wanted Jhoan Duran, and the Red Sox didn't trade him. Once it seemed like Duran was going to stay put, I sort of moved focus to Luis Robert because he was pretty hot in July, and he had superstar potential, and he's elite defensive center fielder. So I thought that was the guy the Mets should get. And I said, if not, they should probably just bring back Harrison Bader. When it came to Mullins, I was always sort of out on him. But then when they pulled off the trade, I came around to the fact that adding Cedric Mullins, I felt still made the Mets better. It allowed Jeff McNeil to come into the infield so they didn't have to wear him down so much. And it gave them a better complement to Tyrone Taylor than Harrison Bader would have been in theory, because we watched that play out last year. And so maybe that's what the Mets thought. Even though I think Bader would have been a great fit, he could have came in, and I think it would have been unfinished business. They decided to go in another direction. But I don't look back at that set of trades and think that's where the Mets lost this season. I don't think that Harrison Bader would have really moved the needle that much for the New York Mets. Who knows if he would have played this well? That's the other part of these trades that you can never quite factor in. You know, it's the same thing with Duran, technically. Like, you don't know that Duran would have adjusted seamlessly to pitching in the eighth inning. For the Phillies, he got to pitch the ninth. You don't know if Bader would have gone right back to the same clubhouse and performed compared to hitting in that ballpark with the Phillies and getting to play with a new team. So it's never something that you'll know where you can just take the numbers and copy and paste them. But clearly the Phillies have gotten more production out of Bader at this time. I just don't think that's where the Mets are going to look back and say, why didn't we get Bader? Now, for Duran compared to Helsley, you can maybe make that argument. So let's talk about that trade. The Mets would have had to give up significantly more when it comes to prospect capital to get Duran than they gave up to get Helsley. To get Helsley, they traded Jesus Baez, an infield prospect. Call him a shortstop. I think he's probably more of a third baseman long-term, but that's who was the big headliner. A guy that I think he might be on Kylie McDaniel's top 100 for ESPN, but not many others. I don't know if I'd even call him a fringe top 100 guy, but he has top 100 potential. Let's call it that. And then they traded a couple of pitchers. Nate Dom, who was their third-round pick last year, had a lot of success with the Mets, has had less success with the Cardinals since the deal, but a guy that could theoretically make it as a starting pitcher someday, and Frank Elisalt more likely a relief prospect. When it comes to what the Phillies gave up to get Duran, they traded 2 top 100 talents. Mick Abel in the back end of some top 100s, a pitching prospect. He's graduated. He has pitched in the big leagues, but still doesn't have a ton of big league time. Still technically a prospect. And then the big piece, Eduardo Tait, a catching prospect who at Just Baseball, where I work, we have him ranked just outside the top 60, number 63 on the top 100. Other outlets have him in the top 50. So a really good, a bona fide consensus top 100 prospect in Tait. At the time of the trade, he had 11 home runs and 51 runs driven in 75 games in low A. 19-year-old catcher. Mick Abel, again, back end top 100 guy, 2.31 ERA and 13 starts in AAA. Held his own in his first few big league starts. He did have a 5.04 ERA with the Phillies, but had some good starts mixed in there. The Mets don't have a catcher at Tait's level. So if you're trying to get a comp for a trade package to get Duran from the Mets system, I think you would have had to give up either Jet Williams or Carson Bench. They are better than Tait when it comes to their prospect status. At Just Baseball, we have Bench at 19 and Jet at 28 in our top 100. So they're both ranked a fair bit above Tait. And then if they had given up one of those guys, they probably could have given up a lesser pitching prospect than Mick Abel. If they had given up a pitching prospect closer to Mick Abel, which would have been probably Brandon Sproat is the closest comp. Sproat's probably maybe a little bit better than Mick Abel. But then they would have had to give up Jacob Reimer or Ryan Clifford when you're talking about the position players. And I would think that a Sproat-Reimer package is still probably less valuable than a Tait-Abel package. So I don't think that Sproat and Reimer would have necessarily gotten a trade done, or a Sproat-Ryan Clifford package would have necessarily gotten a trade done, because the Twins probably look at Tait and say, that's our catcher of the future. And that's why they pulled the trigger on the Phillies package. So for the Mets to have beaten that package, they either would have had to give up a better prospect than Tait, Jet Williams or Carson Bench, a comparable one, which I don't know if they have a comparable one because they don't have a catcher in that level. So it would have been one of those guys, or they would have to give up a much better pitching prospect than Mick Abel. So then you're talking about trading Jhoan or Nolan McLean potentially. I think one thing that is clear in my mind is I would not have wanted the Mets to give up Jet Williams, Carson Bench, Jhoan, and clearly not Nolan McLean. And so we will never know what those conversations were with the Twins. But the Twins very well could have said, we want Nolan McLean or no deal, or we want Jet Williams or no deal. And if that's the case, the Mets made the right call. For the Phillies, they might have said, we want Eduardo Tait and Mick Abel or no deal. Or that was the best package the Phillies put forth. And they said, all right, we like it. And they came to terms. Now, if the Mets could have picked up Duran for Brandon Sproat and another prospect, then I would say they made a mistake. But at the same time, that's because I haven't seen Brandon Sproat pitch in the big leagues yet. If Brandon Sproat pitches on Tuesday against Philly and goes 7 scoreless and strikes out 8, I might change my tune. I think if you really sit back and you look at what the Mets did at the trade deadline, I think their thought process on how they attacked it was a good one. I really do. The results, though, clearly have been bad. So how do we rectify that? How do we view this trade deadline? Was it a massive failure? Was it in their control? How do we grade it? That's where we're going to close the show here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute that you want to head to the ballpark with your friends and family and check out a game? Maybe you're looking at the upcoming homestand, the last of the season, and saying, I need to get it to Citi Field one more time before the end of the regular season. Well, Game Time is the best way to get your tickets. It's the easiest way to get those last-minute tickets without the stress. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. So for me, I wait until I'm about to walk into the ballpark. Then I go and try to find my seat. I can view my seat before I buy, so I know exactly what to expect when I arrive. You can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps. You're all set. And Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and you get a lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, at the trade deadline, if I was going to give David Stearns a grade for what the Mets had accomplished, I think I said something like an A-, because they checked off all the boxes. They got a left-handed reliever. They got a setup man. They got a closer type. And they got a starting center fielder. And they did all of it without trading any of the top prospects that it would have hurt to deal. Any of them. I would make the case that they did not trade any of their top 5 pitching prospects or any of their top 6 position player prospects. And you could probably even expand those lists out a little bit further. But for me, if I was to say the Mets' top 5 pitching prospects at the time of the deadline, it would have been Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat, Jonathan Santucci, and Jack Wenninger. There was no prospect that they traded that was in that level. Blade Tidwell, you could have made an argument for because he is close to the big leagues, but also Blade Tidwell, a guy that was good, but not as good as these other prospects. And at a certain point, you might run into a little bit of a roster crunch. And you have Christian Scott to think about, who's going to be coming off his Tommy John surgery next season. So what was Blade Tidwell's role with the Mets moving forward? He probably was going to end up in the bullpen. So to cash in on him when he's still a starting pitcher prospect was probably the right time to deal him. Nate Dom, some of the other arms the Mets traded, there really wasn't much that they did. A lot of the arms they traded were relief prospects. Then you talk about the hitter side. At the time of the deadline, I would have said Carson Bench, Jet Williams, Elian Pena, Ryan Clifford, Jacob Reimer, probably the top 5 position player prospects in the Mets system. And then I probably would have put AJ Ewing next. You can make a case for maybe even Nick Morabito before you would have gotten to Drew Gilbert. Maybe I would have leaned Gilbert over Morabito. I don't know. I'd have to go back and really think about it. But the bottom line is Drew Gilbert did not have a future with the New York Mets. His future with the Mets was probably a 4th outfielder. He was not going to be the starting center fielder of the Mets. He certainly was going to be the right fielder or the left fielder. That's Nimmo and Soto. And they got Carson Bench, a top 20 prospect in all of baseball. And I think going into next year, he's probably a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. That's your center fielder of the future. Drew Gilbert was getting to be big league ready, but he wasn't going to contribute for the Mets down the stretch. And I'm sure that some of you might have seen his stats. And I honestly put a little bait out there for Mets fans on my social media a couple days ago because he has had some good numbers, but they're really isolated to his last 2 series played. He had a good series when the Orioles came to town to face the Giants. He had 2 multi-hit games, drove in 5 runs, and then he went to Coors and hit a couple of home runs. Now he has an .815 OPS in 20 games, and I'm sure some people are saying, oh, Drew Gilbert's better than Cedric Mullins. Look, Cedric Mullins has had a long big league career. Drew Gilbert, I mean, right now, if you told me that Drew Gilbert was going to enjoy the career that Cedric Mullins had, I would say that's maybe the best possible outcome for him, honestly. Because Mullins has been pretty good. I think Drew Gilbert more likely ends up being probably a 4th outfielder in the big leagues. So you look at the moves that the Mets made. Yes, by the nature of trading for rentals, yeah, all of those trades can turn into L's if the Mets don't win the World Series this year. All of them. And there is a chance that Jesus Baez for the Cardinals could turn into a star. That could be the one that ends up biting you. And that's the trade for Ryan Helsley. But to have gotten Duran, you would have had to give up Benj, Jet, McLean, or Tong. I'm almost certain of it. And if not, you have to give up Sproat, maybe Clifford, and maybe more on top to have actually beaten the Phillies package. And we'll never know what those conversations really were. So as we look back and grade the Mets trade deadline, right now it's an incomplete. We still don't know the final picture. We don't know in September, Duran might give up 9 runs, blow 4 games for the Phillies, and the Mets might storm back into this division. Ryan Helsley could have hit rock bottom yesterday and turn into an absolute stud again. And he is the bridge you wanted to Edwin Diaz going to the playoffs. You still don't know what is going to happen. But when you sit back and you really look at each trade and you think about the thought process, and you also think about the fact that the Mets were just graded by some outlet. I can't remember who it was, if it was ESPN, Pipeline, or Baseball America, but one of the top outlets just ranked the Mets as having the best farm system in all of baseball. And when have we ever been able to say that for the New York Mets? At best, the Mets farm system has been middle of the pack at times over the last 20 years. I don't even know. Since I've been covering the team, they've never had a good farm system. They've always been either middle of the pack or more often back of the pack. And so I say that because the future is so bright for the New York Mets, and the architect of that future is David Stearns. And so frequently now, and I'm probably just hearing or seeing the loud minority on social media, and it's not an accurate depiction of what Mets fans feel, but I'm seeing a lot of David Stearns hate lately. David Stearns messed up. David Stearns is a bad GM. Fire David Stearns. And I'm sorry, from my vantage point, if you think the Mets should fire David Stearns, or you think David Stearns is bad at his job or has not been anything but excellent as the Mets executive for the last 2 years, their lead executive, I don't think there's ever going to be a GM that satisfies you. I think you're just always going to hate whoever it is that's in that seat, unless the Mets are winning 110 games every season and they're winning consecutive World Series. Because, yes, the Mets have not had a World Series title yet under David Stearns. But in his not even 2 full years running this team, the Mets made the NLCS. They're in playoff position right now. They signed Juan Soto, and they have turned this farm system into one of, if not the best in all of baseball, promising perennial success for this franchise. This just might not be the Mets' year. The trades that they made blew up in their face up to this point. It just might not be the season where the Mets make it all happen. But you can't just operate solely on hindsight and say, oh, that guy sucks. Because guess what? The same people that are saying that David Stearns sucks and Ryan Helsley should be DFA'd right now, which also is ridiculous because you're not going to take a guy you traded for at the deadline and cut him after one bad month, no matter how bad that month has been, especially when he throws 102 miles per hour and relievers can click overnight. Something can happen and mentally something shifts and he finds his slider the next time out, and Ryan Helsley could put up 10 consecutive scoreless appearances and strike out 17. I mean, you never know. That he has such a high ceiling. You're not going to DFA him. If it stays this awful for the next month, there's an outside chance he's left off a postseason roster. But you're not cutting him. But all the fans who want Ryan Helsley cut today, who think David Stearns should be fired, they're the same fans that were fired up when they saw the name come across their ticker, Ryan Helsley trades to the New York Mets. Because at the time, none of us saw this happening. And I pulled some comments from the episode I did right after the trade to just see what the fan reaction was. Let's go through some comments real quick. My bad, Stearns. I didn't know you had it in you. Bullpen going to be lights out. Let's go Mets. In all caps, Stearns cooking. Fire emoji. Best bullpen in all of baseball. Love this move. ... Never thought they'd go this deep. ... This bullpen looks deep and, all caps, dangerous. So incredibly stoked on Helsley. Our 8th, 9th handoff is sick now. Shake off this Padres series. LGM! Exclamation. Avengers assemble. LGM. Those are just some of the comments. None of us could have seen this fall from grace. None of us. Has David Stearns pulled all the right strings this year? Clearly not. Some of those trades have not worked. Obviously, some of the free agent signings, like Frankie Montas, have not worked. But others have. Clay Holmes has. Griffin Canning has. This might not be the Mets' year, but they're still in a position where it could be their year. They're 4 games up on the Giants, 5 games up on the Reds with 22 games left to play. They could, for the third time in franchise history, make the postseason in back-to-back years if they can pull it off. They're 5.5 games back in the NL East with 4 games left to play against the Phillies. Let's see what the next month looks like. Let's see how this season finishes. And then we'll determine how much of a disaster that trade deadline truly was. But I think the thought process was sound. And long term, I'm looking at a team that has now potential budding ace in Nolan McLean, another guy with incredible potential in Jhoan. They have coming behind them Brandon Sproat, Jonathan Santucci, Jack Weninger, a lot of arms. There's potentially your future starting center fielder waiting in the wings in AAA. Jet Williams, who could be your center fielder, but more likely because of bench, your starting second baseman. You have a couple of slugging bats at the corners with Ryan Clifford and Jacob Reimer, who are both having really good seasons. You still have Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, and Luis Acuna trying to figure out what you do with all those guys and the talent that you have there. You're probably trading some of them, or at least one of them, this deadline or this offseason to bolster your roster for 2026. And you have a core of Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Alvarez, all those guys are going to be around for a pretty long time here. So the Mets have a really bright future. And apologies to those of you who hate the guy. They have the right executive with his hand on the wheel in David Stearns. And I'm confident, if nothing else, that he's going to keep this farm system as one of the best in baseball, which is going to mean that at every single deadline and every single offseason moving forward, the Mets will have the capital to pull off any trade that they want to. And maybe next time around, he finds the right guys to plug in that'll take the team and push them over the top. But there's still a chance that the guys the Mets traded for this year were the right guys when it matters most. So let's not give up on all of them right now, where the Mets are still sitting comfortably in playoff positioning. Let's watch these final 22 games, see where the Mets end up, and then we'll judge them after the postseason. But I thought it was fun to go down and look at the deadline a month later with some hindsight, but also with the perspective of where the Mets are at and where they're going to go moving forward. And I don't think it was as much of a failure and disaster as it's probably going to get painted if the Mets don't end up where they wanted to be, which is holding the World Series trophy when it's all said and done. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, we'll focus back in on the stretch run. I want to talk about pitching chaos. How are the Mets going to set up their rotation for that Phillies series? And of course, we'll preview the Red series. So we'll be going through all of that good stuff. Appreciate all of you tuned in today. And for those of you who will keep on tuning into the show throughout the rest of the season, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. You subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Help us get to that next goal of 15,000 subscribers. If you want to be part of the texting service, go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. And I also want to tell you about another big moment on Locked On for college football fans, because Locked On and Fire TV are going to present now the College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation along two-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson and former college star Jesse Holley and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season only on Fire TV.